It's been 3 years since the release of Fire Emblem's best-selling title, Fire Emblem Three Houses, and in a recent Nintendo Direct, we were finally greeted with the trailer for the next mainline installment in the series. And as someone that's a huge Fire Emblem fan for the last 8 years or so, I wanted to chime in and give both a breakdown of the trailer, but also my personal opinions on what I'm excited for in this game and what I'm nervous about. So whether you're a fan of Fire Emblem, or this is your first introduction to the series, strap in as I cover everything Fire Emblem Engage. Starting with the presentation of this game, I have to discuss Alir's design first. I'm not gonna lie, when I first saw the leak, I really hated the design and wished it wouldn't be true, but they do look better in the trailer. I still don't like the hair, but the design is growing on me, especially the outfit. I prefer the male version, mainly for the fact that he has less hair, so it looks slightly less tacky compared to the female variant. I'm also glad he's a sword user, because I enjoy the tradition of Fire Emblem lords wielding a legendary blade. When it comes to the overall character art style, I'm really not a fan of the anime direction for the characters. Fire Emblem has always used an anime aesthetic, but their designs were always distinguishable from anime characters or other anime JRPGs. I personally thought that Three Houses really leaned into the full anime look, but Engage leads into it even harder. My favorite art style was Awakenings, where yes, there was an anime look, but the characters still held some realistic features. Three Houses by comparison was already pushing it for me, but now looking at Engage, many of the designs look like they're directly from a mobile game or from another series altogether. One of the characters, Alfred, looks like a downgraded and even more anime version of Dimitri from Three Houses. And just look at this comparison of two fairly similar looking young blonde characters and how differently they're portrayed between Awakening and Engage. Fire Emblem at its core is a series about war, and while I don't need the art style to be extremely realistic, I feel that the more cartoony and anime it looks, the harder it is to take it seriously. On the other hand, games like Persona are usually set in more of a light-hearted school setting, so the art style completely fits. I don't have a problem with anime, but more with the context of the games that it's in. But when it comes to the game art style, I do enjoy the graphics and pop of color that's present in this game. The graphics still aren't amazing by any means, but they're a step up from Three Houses. I really like all the colors that are shown through the maps and battles so far, because I think they really gave more of a personality to the game. Like I said before, Fire Emblem is a series about war, so having so many bright colors does contrast that theme. However, it's only been one trailer, and that too seems to have displayed many of the early parts of the game, so I'm still hopeful to see some different color palettes and environments in the game later on, which maybe reflect more of a serious war tone. Moving on to the animations, so far they look really good. One of the main issues I had with Three Houses was that animations were really boring and had no personality at all. From what we've seen so far, these animations are a lot faster, smoother, and the hit packs more of a punch like they did in Awakening. I really hope that they make a lot of animations for characters and try to personalize it for each character. Fire Emblem is a game where characters and their personalities are emphasized, so it feels really weird when every character is so unique in the story, but all act identical in gameplay and have no defining traits. Especially since in this game, the characters matter even more, with some being new characters and some being older legendary heroes. I feel like it would be boring if they all just shared the same animation. I would be fine with having a more limited unit promotion system if it meant that every character would have much more of an identity to them, because when characters can be any class, it's definitely harder to incorporate their personality into every single possible class for them to be in. I also want the same to apply for skills and combat arts if they are in this game. In Three Houses, a lot of the combat arts had very similar animations, and it really wasn't that fun to use them, so I'd hope for them to be a lot more dynamic and even cinematic like we see here. Another thing to note is that there's no longer a cut-in portrait during critical hit animations, which I do miss, but the zoom-ins are also great. I also really like how much more dynamic the backgrounds are in battle and how they match the top-down view of the maps. Seeing characters actually standing on top of a fort is really cool, and I hope that battles feature more interactive objects. I'm really curious to know what happens if there's a unit on top of the fort and one below. How would the animation look? Alright, now let's move on to the gameplay portion of the trailer, and there's a lot to talk about here. From what we see, I think the gameplay looks great. It's traditional Fire Emblem gameplay that fans love, but this time the new gimmick is the new emblem rings that bring back main characters from the previous games. I'm gonna save my thoughts on how I feel about the characters themselves returning for later in the video, but I think that as a gimmick, this does seem fun. At its core, it seems to draw from Fire Emblem Awakening's pair-up mechanic, which was fun, but I hope that it's more balanced like Fate's was. It's currently unclear whether or not Emblem Engage is exclusive to specific characters or not. It seems that characters can use any rings of their choice, but so far we've only seen Alir engage with Marth, Alfred with Sigurd, and Celine with Celica. Personally, I feel like if the characters have some kind of real connection to the emblem that they're tied to within the story, then it should be restricted to only them. But if there's not much of a connection within the story, then I think it would make sense to let players mismatch new characters so that they can engage with anyone that they choose. I would also be down for something in the middle, where a leader can engage with any Emblem character he wants, and the others are restricted to just one. Kinda like how the main character in Persona can use any persona he wants, but the side characters can only use one. My guess is that each character would only be able to engage with a specific emblem, because the engaged character has its own unique model, and it would be super tedious to create a new model for every combination of engaged units. I also think that the summoning of the emblem will only last a few turns, and the engaged form will only be for one turn, just to balance the game more. In terms of other mechanics, I love to see both attacking skills and combat arts return, and what I mean by attacking skills are the ones that are along the lines of Astra, Soul, Luna, or Aether, skills that don't just give stat buffs or debuffs, but actually come along with their own animations. I'd also want them to be based on a percent chance again, because I felt like that really spiced up the gameplay a lot more. For me, it was boring in Three Houses to choose Astra as a combat art beforehand, rather than being surprised when it happened mid-battle like in Awakening and Fates. I'd also love for combat arts to return again, and be specific to characters and weapons once more, like in Three Houses and in Echoes. Another feature I'd love for them to bring back in this game is recruitable characters. Recruiting was possible in Three Houses, but I mean recruitments on the battlefield as opposed to outside of battle. I always found these to be a great surprise every few chapters, because it was always fun to figure out when a unit could be recruited and the reasoning for joining our team. It also kept the gameplay exciting, because you keep getting to try new characters as the game progresses. I think this could also spice up the map objectives. For example, a unit would only join your party if you saved a specific village, or something along those lines. And that brings me to my next point, being map objectives. I think something that all Fire Emblem fans can agree on is that we need more map objectives. Fire Emblem is a game series about war that typically has very complicated stories, so the game sometimes feels dumbed down when every single time our team must defeat all the enemies in our path. War is much more complicated than that, and I'd really enjoy other objectives for us to play that actually reflected that, like defending an area or a person, saving a village, escaping from someone or something, fighting multiple armies at once, and more. I'd even love to see minor story developments happen during the battle, which forces the objective to change and makes the player change their original strategy. The gameplay in this game won't be restricted to just battles though, as we see that there will be a home base again, similar to Garreg Mach Monastery from Three Houses. I'm not the biggest fan of this inclusion, because in Three Houses it got pretty tiresome to keep spending 45 minutes between battles doing the exact same chores over and over again. If the developers wanted the players to be able to move around freely again, I would have preferred a new style where the player physically walks from one location on the map to the next one, and encountering enemies would result in a battle starting. Think the dungeons in Echoes, but instead of just dungeons, we're actually traversing across an open-ish world. But hey, maybe that's an idea for the next Fire Emblem game. In the clip we've seen so far, it seems to be called Somnial, which is a word that means relating to dreams. I do get a dreamlike feeling from the floating islands that we see, so this might be our excuse to have a home base no matter where we are on the world map. Personally, I would have enjoyed our team to make a home base in every new area of the world that we visited, so that we'd have a change of scenery, and maybe some activities to do that would be specific to that area, but I can understand that being difficult for the developers to program. It seems like we can do a variety of activities within the home base, like change units' clothing, which is pretty cool. I wonder if they'll stay that way during battles, but moreover for in-game cutscenes as well. Alright, so now we get to the most controversial part, being the story of the game. My initial reaction to seeing returning characters was really mixed. On one hand, I think it's great to see fan favorite characters back in a traditional format and in much better graphics and 3D models. But on the other hand, I can't help but get a spin-off feeling because the only time multiple returning characters from different games are together are for fan service type games like Fire Emblem Heroes and Warriors. Now, one of the leaks, which has now been confirmed to be true, did say that this game was originally made for Fire Emblem's 30th anniversary and got pushed back until now, so that explains why we have all this fan service. But the fact that it still is a traditional Fire Emblem game means that it'll get held to that standard. So returning characters or not, I expect it to still have a good, cohesive story, unlike Heroes and Warriors. First, let's talk about the setup of the game, where we're told that the continent of Elyos is a land with 4 realms surrounding Holy Land. Already, this setup reminds me of Three Houses, with the 3 countries surrounding Garreg Mach Monastery. On the top left, we have a rocky kingdom with these red flags hanging. Then, to the top right, we have a snowy kingdom. On the bottom left, we have a grassy kingdom, and on the bottom right, we have a desert kingdom. The Holy Land itself seems to be really interesting. A dark ring surrounds the Holy Land, which might be because the Fell Dragon is already reawoken. I'm really hoping that we spend time in each of these regions, and that they're all really well fleshed out. In Three Houses, I felt that we didn't get to learn much about the culture and the people of the 3 main countries, and the politics were a bit confusing to follow. So I hope in this game, we we get more of a feel for what the different countries are like and what their goals and values are. I also wanted to point out that there are boats going across the map and that there are actually sea monsters drawn out. To compare, Fodlan's map showed no importance to water, so I think there might actually be some significance to there being so much shown in this scene. Maybe we'll get some levels that take place on a boat or fight some sea creatures. After this, we're told that 1000 years ago, the people of Elyos endured a war against the Fell Dragon, and that they called upon heroes known as Emblems to aid them in battle. A few things are interesting here. First is that we know that a war happened 1000 years ago where legendary Fire Emblem heroes were summoned, which means that that war took place after every single Fire Emblem game in the timeline. So that means that this second war, which is going to take place in this game, is even further in the future, confirming that the events that take place in this game are very far in the future compared to previous Fire Emblem games. I really hope that since these heroes have been summoned before, that they'll have some recollection of fighting in that first war during the events of this game. I just think it would be weird if the heroes had no input about the war or somehow forgot when they've literally taken part in it 1000 years prior. I also find this to be an odd choice for a setup. If we're basically repeating the same sequence of events as it happened the first time around, then why does the game specifically take place the second time around? Shouldn't it take place during the first war, when summoning heroes happened for the first time within the Fire Emblem timeline? Secondly, the dragon we're fighting is called the Fell Dragon, which immediately makes me think of Grima from Awakening, since that was his title. But clearly, their designs are very different, so are these two the same dragon or not? Knowing Fire Emblem lore, it's very possible that it's still the same dragon reincarnated in some form, but at the same time, maybe Fell Dragon is just a title to refer to evil dragons. After all, Fire Emblem Heroes does use Fallen as a title to refer to evil characters that were once good, so it could just be a naming device. Still though, to refer to it as Fell Dragon when that title has been reserved for Grima is suspicious, especially considering a few other parallels to Awakening that we'll see later. My personal hope is that it actually is Grima, or is in some way connected to him, because my favorite game in the series is Awakening, and I think it would be interesting to connect the villains from previous games into this game, especially for bringing back heroes as well. But more than just that is the fact that this wouldn't be the first time Grima is present outside of Awakening. In the post-game of Fire Emblem Echoes, Grima is present in its early form, so it would be really cool to see if maybe this is Grima in an older form, and see if characters like Lucina and even Celica might react to seeing him again. This is pure speculation, but if this Fell Dragon were to be Grima, then I think that confirms that the canon ending to Awakening is to have Chrom finish Grima, because that would seal him away for 1000 years, and then the first war would happen, where the heroes were summoned, and now the second war is happening during the events of this game. Last bit of information we see during this scene are the 12 heroes on the tapestry. The portraits correspond to Marth, Celica, Sigurd, Leif, Roy, Lyn, Erica, Ike, Micaiah, Lucina, Corrin, and Violet, which is going in order from oldest to newest. Some things that are interesting here are that Sigurd isn't wielding his Tearfing, but is instead wielding a lance. Lucina is wearing her mask and is wielding a bow similar to her look in Fire Emblem Heroes, and Ike is wielding an axe also similar to his look in Fire Emblem Heroes. My guess here is to show diversity in the weapon types, since most of these characters would typically all wield swords. I would think that they'll still be able to use their usual weapons, since we see Marth with the falchion in cutscenes and Mercurius in gameplay, but who knows. And as for the characters that got selected, it's obvious that each game is seemingly getting one rep, and they've chosen 6 males and 6 females to keep it even, which explains why some of the games with multiple lords or avatar characters have the female counterpart chosen. Even though it's not been confirmed, I'm just going to keep my hopes low for the amount of returning Emblem characters, and just assume it's only the 12 that are shown here. Obviously, I'd love for some of my favorite characters to return again, like Chrom, Alm, the House Leaders, and even the Fates Royal Princes, but I'd also really enjoy seeing 3D models of characters from older games, like Seliph and Hector. The only hope I have for more emblems to return is that we know this game features a lot of characters based on the full art, as well as the leaks. So if we're going by the logic that each character can engage with only one emblem, then there would have to be an even number of both new characters and emblems, and there's definitely way more than 12 new characters. But obviously, we don't exactly know the full extent of emblems yet, so let's move on. We're then shown a scene where a man defeats the Fell Dragon 1000 years ago. I initially thought this was Marth, but now that I'm thinking about it, this might be Alir, since he's wearing a ring, and we later find out that Alir has been asleep for 1000 years. So the timeline would match up where Alir and the emblems fought the Fell Dragon 1000 years ago, and then Alir fell into a 1000-year-long slumber. Our narrator then says that she senses a resurrection, and we see a very evil-looking man with a third eye, which is very similar to the third eye on the Fell Dragon. He also seems to share some similarities with Validar, but I'm not sure if that's intentional or not. The fact that our narrator says she senses a resurrection makes me immediately think that she's most likely some kind of dragon or goddess figure herself. We then see Alir wake up and grab his ring, and see a big white dragon flying above him. It looks pretty similar to the white dragon on the tapestry painting. It's also likely that the girl under the tree is a human form of that dragon. Later in the trailer, we hear that Alir is a divine dragon himself, so why are there two seemingly good dragons and only one bad? Moving on, we see a scene of Alir fighting soldiers in a room where blue soldiers are fighting what we learn later are called the Corrupted. I really found this scene to be super reminiscent of this scene where Lucina is fighting the Risen in Fire Emblem Awakening. I'm not sure if that was on purpose as some kind of callback or Easter egg, or just a coincidence, but it would definitely be cool if there were little Easter eggs from all the previous games scattered throughout this game as a nod to the 30th anniversary. After that, we see what looks to be an opening cutscene displaying some of the main characters. We know that these guys are important because they've been given the special screen time and because they're all featured on the box art of the game. My guess is that these four are going to be the respective leaders for each of the four regions we discussed before. The redhead is probably going to be the leader of the snowy region because we see another redhead in a snowy background in a later scene. I'm assuming this darker skinned girl is the leader of the desert region since she's probably wearing less clothing for the hotter temperatures. Then we see Alfred, who really looks like Dimitri here with his lance and hair. I think he's the leader of the grassy region because so far we've seen him in gameplay the most out of these four, and most of it is taking place in grassy settings. And that leaves us with this mage girl, who's probably going to be the leader of the Rocky Kingdom. The scene changes again and we see Alir summoning Marth before revealing the title and quickly shifting to the scene of Alir waking up. He wakes up to what looks like two siblings. From later footage, we know their names to be Frem and Clan. Alir comments that he's been asleep for 1000 years, and we get our first look at the Corrupted as well as Vander. Again, calling back to Awakening, the Corrupted look eerily similar to the Risen, even down to how they disintegrate like the Risen did. Going by the name, I'd assume that these are soldiers that have been corrupted by the Fell Dragon's magic. As we see more gameplay footage, we hear Vander explain that Alir is a divine dragon and a member of a royal family of dragons, so maybe the dragon we saw before is related to him. Then we hear Alir call the Fell Dragon's name, but the clip is cut off before he mentions anything else. I think this part confirms the theory that Alir did participate in the fight 1000 years ago alongside the Emblems in their first war against the Fell Dragon. I'm almost sure that he'll end up having amnesia from being asleep for 1000 years, which is why I really hope the Emblems bring it up, since they should remember fighting with each other. After seeing footage of the new engage mechanic, we see a really short scene of what looks to be an older man brandishing a sword. Judging by his armor and his crown, maybe he's the king of the snowy country, and the redhead we saw earlier is his son. We then see a young girl who looks like the dragon girl we saw before. Then we see one of the most interesting clips in the trailer, an evil looking man putting a glowing purple ring on his finger. This scene has some serious implications. Does that mean that villains in this game can summon the emblems and make them fight for them? If that's the case, I'd really be interested in seeing how some of our favorite characters fight for the bad guys. Are they going to oblige, or are they going to be reluctant? Or are we going to see villain characters summon villains from previous games? I think it would be insanely cool to see some of the main villains from older games team up together and have these rivalries and showdowns with our emblem characters. I definitely prefer the latter option, but either way, I really hope that there's some good dialogue and moments between the emblem characters, because this would be one of their main times to shine. Another scene in the Snowy Kingdom plays where a war is taking place. I always love these scenes where you can really see the totality of how massive the war is, because during gameplay you can really lose sense of that scale. It seems like the Snow Kingdom is taking out some kind of zombie army. I'm not sure if this is the Corrupted, because I don't see their eyes glowing like we've seen before. Our second to last scene shows Alir, along with Alfred, the redhead, the dark-skinned girl, and the mage, preparing for battle against the Fell Dragon. I like the sense of scale that this scene brings, as it really shows us how big the Fell Dragon is, just like how big Grima was in Awakening. The scene itself is reminiscent of this scene from Awakening, but this could be a stretch since these kind of scenes are fairly common in video games. We also get a better view of the Fell Dragon's cobra-like design, which really is an odd choice to me since it doesn't look all that natural. During this scene, we also hear Alir say that she asked him to gather all the rings and bring peace back to Elyos. So maybe we start with 1 or 2 rings, and then take back more rings as we defeat more bosses. If this is how the game goes, then I hope there's more to the story, because it sounds like a pretty shallow plotline. I'm expecting there to be a lot more in terms of the lore, world building, and politics between the different factions and religions in Elyos. And also, if the game is played in a way where we work our way up to getting all the rings by the end of the game, then that means we have to wait most of the game to use some characters like Corrin and Byleth, assuming we go in chronological order. So I really hope if that's how the story is going to work, we get our rings and then more things happen so we actually have time to use the characters and to hopefully hear all of their voices during the story. Our final scene shows Alir and Marth opening the door and welcoming in a new era of mainline Fire Emblem. Alright, so now that we've gone over the entire trailer, I'm just going to give my overall thoughts. To me, this game has a lot of potential. Graphically and gameplay wise, I'm already sold. I've got some gripes with the art style, but it's nothing I can't get over. The graphics look so much more polished than Three Houses, and the gameplay looks really fun and smooth. I like the new Emblem mechanics, and if you throw me some interesting and different map styles, then I'm completely set with the gameplay department. But the story is where I have both the most hope and the most fear. Bringing back old characters is a really big risk, especially when the context isn't a spin-off game. In spin-off games, usually all is forgiven because everyone knows the game isn't related to the true story or timeline of the series, unless it's explicitly stated. But this isn't a spin-off, so that means this game not only takes place in the official Fire Emblem timeline, but it also means that the stories of our favorite characters don't end in their respective games, and they officially continue within this game. It's like when we found out in Fates that Owen, Inigo, and Severa were still present in that game, despite being from Awakening. It immediately tied Fates and Awakening's worlds together, and also expanded on the trio's characters much more than we initially knew about them in Awakening. Even though we thought that book was closed on them after Awakening, their stories were officially extended through Fates and its DLC, so now that's canon within the Fire Emblem universe. And that's a big deal considering that these aren't just side characters from Awakening anymore, they're the faces of the entire franchise now. So I really hope Intelligent Systems does these characters justice, and doesn't just BS them into the story somehow. I hope that there's a real reason for why the Emblem characters are here. I want them to have dialogue and have a say within the story. I'm completely fine with there being only 12 Emblem characters, as long as they're meaningful additions to the story. If these are just characters that are BS into the story and are only for summoning and gameplay, then I'm gonna be really disappointed. We've always been able to summon older characters since the 3DS era either through Spot Pass or Amiibo, so if this game is making it a point to be a core mechanic of the game, then there absolutely needs to be a story reason for them to be in the game and for them to have major contributions to the story. And in doing so, I hope that they do the characters right. It would be a shame if they completely ruin the personalities of the Emblem characters, because again, everything is official now. If you didn't like how Marth spoke or was like in Fire Emblem Warriors or Heroes, it doesn't really matter because it's just a spin-off. But now, everything he says and does is canon to the lore, so how he and the others are portrayed matters even more. Anyways, that's all I have to say about the game for now. As you can see, I'm very passionate about the game, and I'm really excited for it to come out, so if you have any thoughts, I'm welcome to discussing them with you in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please like, subscribe, and share the video. It really helps for a smaller channel trying to grow. I'll see you guys on the next one.